Good morning, everybody, or afternoon, early morning, wherever you are. We're Cristina and Sara from One Woman Shop, a resource hub and membership community for female solo business owners. And this is our weekly episode of The Hot Seat, where we bring topics that pertain to solopreneurship and running a solo business onto Blab to discuss between the two of us and hopefully anybody else that wants to join in the conversation. But I don't know, this is kind of like a different one for us. It's definitely, we're bringing in our One Woman Shop book club, but this is in itself a different type of book. So Cristina, do you want to introduce what we're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. So today we're talking about StrengthsFinder 2.0. And so it's a bit of a book, but like you said, not completely, because it's mostly a personality assessment test. And I feel, hard copy. See, I just go for the Kindle, but yeah, so we did the StrengthsFinder assessment test. I feel like my video is so slow and so awkward right now. And we are going to reveal what our strengths are. So do you want to talk about basically the whole gist of the book?
Yeah, so this is really interesting. At first, I was honestly a little overwhelmed with like what kind of commitment is this going to be, and just the idea of a personality test. But what I liked about this is it's actually a pretty small book, and that's for a reason, because the first portion of it is introducing you to the philosophy behind StrengthsFinder and where this test came from. And then the rest of the book is actually digging into the strengths that your personality test brings out. But what I found incredibly interesting, and that we'll talk about a lot more, is that it comes at it from the perspective that we spend most of our lives working on improving upon our weaknesses and turning our weaknesses into potential strengths, as opposed to capitalizing on the talents and strengths we already have. So that's kind of the basis for the whole thing.
Yeah. And so we're going to have a lot of the same highlighted stuff because, like you said, there's not much to highlight in the intro. But there is a story that I know you wrote about on our little notes, and I obviously thought about, which is about Rudy. So they made a movie about him. He had basically not much natural talent for football.
Notre Dame
football. Same thing as basketball, right? So for football, but he basically overcame his lack of natural ability and had kind of this glorious moment. And that's what the whole movie's about. And Tom Roth, who's the author of StrengthsFinder, is like, that isn't something we should necessarily be celebrating. He didn't capitalize on his natural strength. So I know that you really liked this equation that Tom Roth mentioned. So do you want to talk about that equation?
Yeah, so basically he was comparing Rudy to Joe Montana, who's a natural football player. So he comes into the sport with an incredible amount of raw talent, and then he puts in a ton of hours of practice. And so his strength is just off the charts, whereas Rudy could put in the same amount of practice, but because he didn't start with the same amount of talent, his strength is never going to equate to Joe Montana's. So the actual equation they share in the book is talent times investment equals strength. So the only way, I know there's like, the 1,000-hour theory or whatever it is or 10,000-hour theory for mastering something. But basically you're starting off at a deficit if you don't already have the talent, is what they're saying. And the only way to really amplify your talent is investment, but you have to start with that talent.
Right. And so I know that I had some mixed feelings because my first reaction is, well, what if that just kind of leads into self-fulfilling prophecy? So for example, I'm like, I'm not good at math, and I don't ever discover I could have been great at math. I think you had the same thought. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah. So there is this, I really like that it comes at it from a totally different perspective. But at the same time, part of me is just like, well, first of all, why do we love the stories like Rudy? Why did that get made into a movie? And I think it's because it just makes for a better story. And we love hearing those stories of triumph, right? But then part of me was kind of like, well, should we not work on the things that we're not good at simply because we don't have raw talent? And as somebody that is a self-described insatiable learner, I want
spoiler alert.
I want to dig. Oh, I didn't even think about that. I want to dig into the things that I'm not good at. You know, like I'm really interested in web development, even though I don't have a natural ability to write code. So to me, it was almost like if we just focus on our talents, are we taking the easy way out?
Mm-hmm. But I think the interesting thing is it's kind of complicated because one of your strengths could be learner. And as a learner, like you said, you want to learn stuff you're not really good at, but then you're still technically capitalizing on your strength, which is learning. So it's almost like you're focusing on your weaknesses, but not really because it's still your strength.
Yeah, and so Cristina and I have not shared our strengths with each other yet. So we're going to be doing that. But to give the people watching some context, if you're not familiar with the personality assessment, so it's about a 30 to 35 minute test. Mm-hmm. You're given, I think it was like something like 178 questions. Yeah. When I saw that, I was like, what? How am I going to ever do this? But they only give you 20 seconds to answer each question. And I don't think I ever took more than 10 seconds on any of them. But if you buy the book, it'll give you the descriptions of what they mean by some of the strengths, like learner or achiever or whatever. There are 34 of them, I think. But when you take the test online, you're given a code that is unique to you. And what they do with this 2.0 is they actually relate all of your answers together and how your strengths work together so that the actual brief they give you is way more tailored than what you'll read in the book as the general descriptions of the themes. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, definitely. And so I think another thing to kind of further explain, so like you said, there's all these different themes. So one is learner, for example. We keep coming back to that because that's the example that he uses. And what I really like is he says, 3 people could all be learners, but the way that manifests in their life is very different. So one person could learn by doing, while another person learns by Googling. So keeping in mind that just because you're a learner doesn't necessarily mean that you're learning the same way as everybody else who's also a learner. So yeah, like you said, they do a pretty good job with the new version of tailoring it.
Yeah. So Cristina and I could have the exact same 5 strengths out of this personality test and yet use them or embody them in such different ways. So I definitely think that's interesting. But the core quote that I think the intro ends with is, we're taught, or our parents are taught to tell us we can be anything we want to be. And what he says is, you cannot be anything you want to be, but you can be a lot more of who you already are. Mm-hmm. So at face value, I was like, what? That's terrible. You cannot be anything you want to be. Like, I inherently disagree with that, but I can absolutely see where he's coming from on so many of these things.
Yeah, definitely. Because I mean, I feel like he's not saying you can't, like if you want to be an astronaut, you can't be an astronaut, but it's like maybe you're not going to be the most empathetic astronaut, but you can be the most proactive astronaut. Does that make sense? Like, I feel like you can be, in terms of being any profession, I don't feel like he's saying you can't be any profession, but he's saying like you can't change your ultimate personality. Mm-hmm. That's how I read it.
Yeah, I think, and that's a really important distinction to make.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have some questions, so we'll get to those that are in the chat. But I also just wanted to say that on the actual test, it's very interesting. You pointed this out, that you have this spectrum and you can strongly agree on this side, strongly agree on this side, or you can be neutral or just agree or agree. So there's no disagree.
Right.
And sometimes the 2 options, they're not opposites, which is really complicated and confusing.
Yes, when I got in there, that is like the number one thing I pointed out was the 2 options are not necessarily opposites. They were on some of them, but it wasn't, I love people, I hate people. It was some degree of something, or two things that really didn't relate even like directly in my mind in the 10 seconds I spent reading it. Yeah, Jenny says Gallup really knew what they were doing on developing this assessment. And it's so true, because my honest hesitation with a lot of personality tests, I had to do one, I can't even remember which one it was, as part of an interview once. And I've done them in different capacities, but this one was particularly interesting because I knew that the outcome was being used to judge me by other people in this interview situation. And so oftentimes I go into them trying to figure out what they're going to say about me based on my answers. And so I don't feel like I'm actually giving an unbiased answer. Yeah. Whereas with this one, some of them I was kind of like, oh, some of them were worded interestingly, where I think one of them started like, my ego is too big, so big that blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, who would want to willingly admit that, But most of them, I didn't even have the chance to be like, well, what might this say about me, or what might they get out of this? I just had to answer. And I thought that was really interesting because it took out a little bit of that bias.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and back to that idea of having the kind of the two things on the end of the spectrum that aren't necessarily different. There was somewhere I was like, it was like, I have close friends or I have many friends. And I was like, both? I mean, really both. Like I love having close friends that I know a lot about, and I love having a lot of acquaintances. And so there was, I think maybe I was surprised by how often I was in the middle and how you do.
Yeah, I actually one of the things I wrote down, I don't know if it was in our doc, was can I not commit? Because I was like, so often I wasn't neutral too often, but I was in between. But I was very, very strongly agree on either side.
Right. I was the same way. The times where I was like strongly agree on either side, I was like, oh, interesting. Like, what does this say about this particular question? So then the other thing I wanted to point out, which I thought was very interesting, is that there's questions that I would answer for myself that I was like, if anyone else was doing this test about me, they would probably answer differently. So the one question that stood out as that example was, they ask about comfort zones. And I'm like, I think a lot of people would be like, Cristina always lives outside her comfort zone. She started a business. She lives in Central America. And I'm like, I don't know, like I really like my comfort zone. I go to the same cafe every single day. And so I just think it's interesting looking at how you answer them versus how someone else would answer them for you.
Yeah, actually that's a really good point. Even looking at the strengths, I think when we reveal ours, mine, I'm honestly going to be like, anybody would probably pick these out for me, but I don't necessarily know that people would answer the questions the same way I did.
Yeah.
So, no, but I think it would be really interesting to see somebody else answering it about you.
Yeah. Well, so I don't know. I chatted Sarah. About this? Yeah. Okay. I chatted Sara yesterday, and I was like, I'm worried that I'm going to reveal my strengths. Sorry.
It always shows up in the recording.
I can hear you fine.
Take two.
Okay. Yay. Okay. So my strength is not my Wi-Fi. I'll tell you that much. But I was like, I'm worried that I'm going to be like, these are my strengths. And I told Sara this. I was like, I'm worried I'm going to be like, these are my strengths. And you're going to be like, no, that's not true. None of those are your strengths. And I'm like, oh. But the nice thing about this test is you really can't go wrong because you're only hearing great things about yourself.
Well, and when I read the descriptions in the book, because I did read them before I read some of them, I should say. I did not read all 34 before I took the test. And some of them, I wouldn't have agreed with them until I got one of them and I read it. And the description that was tailored to me, I agreed with. So I think it's not so much just the word or the term they're using. It's their particular description of how it applies to you, where you're like, yes, I can agree with that.
Yeah, for sure. So I feel like we got to do the big reveal. So I want to know what your strengths are. I mean, I already know a lot of your strengths, but I want to see what they said.
All right. So my first one, which I'm really not Jenny, sorry. For people not watching the chat, she said, "Is it woo?" So I just had to laugh at that. It's not.
Sorry. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's actually one other interesting thing is I've done this in the past, like years ago, and my answers have definitely changed, which is interesting.
That is really interesting because on the site, or maybe in the book, the most frequently asked question was, if I've done this before, especially the 1.0 version, should I do it again? And what they were saying is that most of the results don't change over time for individuals. It's just that the test itself will give you a better description of what it means for you. So that's interesting because Jenny's also saying hers changed. So I definitely want to do this again, I think in like 10 years.
5 years. Yeah, 5 years.
How long did you do it?
Yeah. Okay. Now the anticipation is really built. So drum roll, tell us your strengths.
Just keep talking. Okay. So my first top one was achiever. So I kind of felt like, well, that's pretty spot on.
I can see that.
Yeah. So when I was reading the personalized strengths insight that they give you, I was really interested in reading how I could actually look back at situations and say like, yeah, that absolutely applies. And one of the things that, are you getting an echo?
I can't hear it, but
okay.
Oh, no, I can hear my own echo.
All right. So one of the things was driven by your talents, you ordinarily take time and exert extra effort to comprehend what you're reading. You probably refuse to rush through written material. Why? You likely intend to commit to memory as many facts and concepts as possible. Now, I get made fun of because I read actually pretty slow, and I read a book from cover to cover. I read the book, the jacket sleeve. I read the author bio. I read the Q&A for book club, whether or not I'm actually in a book club. I read everything from front to back. And where I laughed the most about this was the way that Cristina and I were sifting through nominations for 100 Best Sites a few weeks ago. We actually set a timer for a minute to dig into the sites that were nominated. And oftentimes I was like, I need way more time. Whereas you, I think, were able to come to a quicker conclusion. And this was
yeah, sometimes I'd be like 10 seconds.
You were done in 20 seconds. And I'm like, wait a minute, I need 20 more minutes. So I think that was one thing I could pull out of that immediately and say, yes, that's me. But I had to get my personalized strengths insight to see that. So I'm interested to hear what your top strength was.
So actually, quick question. This is ranked, right? The strengths?
That's a great question. I took it as being ranked. Yeah.
We just got our answer from Coach Jenny here in the chat. Thank you, Jenny. You're her answer to everything. You're ranked. My first one is, you're going to die. You're going to be like, yeah, strategic. So, because the word, I'm like, okay, but then I read the description. I was like, oh my gosh. Okay, people who are especially talented in the strategic theme create alternative ways to proceed. Faced with any given scenario, they can quickly spot the relevant patterns and issues. And I laughed when I read that because every single blog post that I write, I'm like, I saw a pattern, and now I'm writing about it.
And every question that I read in the test that said something about, I like to analyze for patterns. I'm thinking, Cristina.
I think that was a few of the times where I was like, absolutely, like strongly agree. I was like, I love patterns so much. And I actually wrote on our document for notes for this, I said, I loved seeing the patterns in the questions. And then I wrote in parentheses, so meta. Yeah, but in case anyone else is strategic, the other things it says is it's very likely you have a knack for identifying problems. You spontaneously generate alternatives for solving them, and you frequently identify ways to transform an obstacle into an opportunity. And so I just thought immediately of the word resourceful, which I love to use all the time.
Yeah. And so are you reading out of your personalized Strengths Finder insight, or are you reading out of the book?
I am reading from the website where it's like the insights in brief. Is
Okay,
that
so
the individualized one?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Cool. Okay,
so do we concur with our top strengths?
I think so.
I like it. Numero dos.
Number 2, I had responsibility. So personalized, that was chances are good that you might choose your friends with care and caution.
And your business partners, hopefully.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, perhaps your most enduring friendships are built on this foundation of mutual trust. I would say that's true in business as well. By nature, you may want to be held accountable for outcomes, but only when what you're asked to do is reasonable. I actually found that pretty interesting. And Coach Jenny can attest to this. I have a lot of layers of accountability in my business. Obviously, in One Woman Shop, I have you, Cristina. In my solo business, I have a business coach, an accountability partner. I was in a mastermind. I just started a writing challenge to keep me accountable for that. And I think that's interesting because my biggest hesitations when I'm in a one-on-one session with Coach Jenny is if it's something that I really am struggling seeing as being realistic, I don't want to be held accountable for it. And that's where I really do pause. And I have my stomach turns a little at those moments. So I read that and I'm like, okay, that truly makes sense. So there is a lot more to this, but I think honestly, I saw a lot of responsibility and achiever going hand in hand. Based on the trust, the commitment, instinct, stuff like that. So I thought I found that really interesting that my top 2 really do go hand in hand.
Yeah. No, that's interesting you say that because I found that as I was reading some of the descriptions, I was like, those overlap so much with each other. So I guess it's no coincidence. Okay, so you concur with number 2?
Yes. What is yours?
Interesting. Okay, so first of all, some of them I was reading, I was like, is that a strength? Because it doesn't really sound so much like a strength. Okay, my second one is command. So it says people who are especially talented in the command theme have presence. They take control of a situation and make decisions. And then I died laughing. I literally laughed out loud in my room. It was like, what are you laughing about? At this quote, maybe your mental agility overpowers some people who like to take charge. So I'm just imagining myself being completely domineering and bullying everyone. That's how I read that. I try not to do that. And then it says, perhaps in your dealings with some individuals, you tone down or moderate your forcefulness. So, yeah, that's a strength, I guess.
No, and I think that comes, so one of the things that I believe it was Big Magic to get that reference in here, but it could have been Rising Strong, so I'll mention that anyway. Where, and this is something we do now with our partnership, is if we both feel strongly about something, we have to take a step back and say, is this worth, am I willing to argue for this? Climb my hill for this, whatever the phrase was. That does make sense with you because I think a lot of times you can come to conclusions faster than me, or you see those patterns or you make the decisions. But you do kind of have to pull back and decide what's worth fighting for.
Yeah, for sure. And for sure. And I think viewing them as an overall strength, but he does make the point that sometimes your strength, you have to take into account that your strength could be really alienating to other people. And so that's, you basically have to learn how to moderate your own strengths. And then the other 2 quotes that I pulled out from Command, which I was just like, yes, this makes so much sense. Once in a while, you may question whether your yearnings for greatness are healthy or wise. And I feel like I have that struggle where I'm like, I want to achieve great things, but sometimes I'm like, is it worth my sanity? Is it worth sacrificing time with friends and family, that kind of thing? So I do feel like I have this pull between wanting to achieve a lot, but also wanting to feel sane and happy. And then the last quote is, by nature, you normally feel very good about life, especially when specific people accept your bold, assertive, self-reliant style. So I'm just imagining my future boyfriend and me being like, you must accept my bold, self-reliant style, and then I will be happy.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Now you can do it. Yeah.
One of the comments on our Instagram feed was one of our followers saying that her husband really wanted her to do this. He had done it before, and he really wanted her to do it. She was just kind of dragging her feet because you do have to purchase your own code to take it. So that made me really interested in how this would help, hurt, or change relationships if you know going into it what your strengths are versus another's. But we can talk about that a little bit more with our partnership too.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, that's sorry. I won't go too far into that.
I was talking to a friend about the languages of
love. I don't know if anyone has read that book, but I feel like it's the same thing with StrengthsFinder. It's knowing yourself and being able to say, like, this is how I give love and this is how I receive love. And being able to articulate that can be so incredible in your relationships. Same thing with your strengths. Like, this is what I'm good at, so here's how we can work on it together.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Okay, I won't delay this anymore. My third one is learner.
I knew it. I was like, she'll for sure get learner.
So this is a pretty safe assumption that this would show up for me. I'm trying to pull out, driven by your talents, you sometimes yearn to acquire more knowledge or gain new skills to deepen your expertise in a particular area. Maybe you suffer when an information vacuum exists or you're left out of the news loop. I could look back at past jobs really quickly and notice that. I had one job where I actually only worked when I was a grad assistant. I worked Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Tuesdays, Thursdays, I was working another job to make money. And when I came back into the office after a day off, it drove me nuts that I missed Tuesday and Thursday, and I didn't know what happened. And I was supposed to just pick up where I left off, even though stuff had happened in between. So I can definitely see how that has affected me in work situations. But the rest of this is really interesting to me because when I talk about learning, I'm talking about learning and getting better at certain things or taking a course. This is actually my personalized assessment is talking very much about learning in terms of people, learning more about people, learning how people work, how people communicate with each other. So this one I really want to dig into a lot more. But I think it's spot on when it's saying that I may enjoy pondering what I can revise, correct, renovate, upgrade, or relocate when it comes to situations or people.
Yeah. Or processes.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Huh. Okay. Is there any more learning insights there? I have to confess something.
Oh, there's probably a lot, but no, that's good for now.
I am going to go out of order and say I also got learner, which I think is very interesting. And I actually predicted this. I was like, we're both going to get learner. But in the example which we mentioned at the beginning of this lab, is that learner can manifest in a lot of different ways. And I think we definitely experience that where we both love to learn, but we do it in very different ways. And so my personalized assessment said about learning, people who are especially talented in the learner theme have a great desire to learn. And want to continuously improve. In particular, the process of learning rather than the outcome excites them. And outside of work, my first thing I immediately thought of was languages. I was talking to my roommate about this, and I was like, she is so frustrated by language learning because she just wants to speak fluently. Whereas I learn a word and I'm like, so cool, I learned this word. I get to use it in a conversation now. And then I think I come up with in context, 10 situations where I get to use that word. And that to me is really exciting, that process. And then another thing that came up under learning was you might have extra energy to work hard when you are acquiring information to broaden your knowledge base. And one of the questions in the test is basically I can only work for a few hours at a time versus I can work for hours on end. And I was thinking how when I'm excited about something, I can work for hours and hours and hours with no breaks, but I have to be excited about it.
Yeah, I think we've seen that in certain situations, specifically with one-woman shop projects.
For sure.
Yeah. No, so where did learner come up in your 5?
4th.
Nice.
Yeah.
So very close. That's really interesting. But that's exactly what I mean when I say like I think it's really cool that even though we could read the book and read learner and both be like, well, that might apply, blah, blah, blah. Our outcomes are the same word in such different applications. But one thing I did pull out of learner that I thought was kind of a paradox for what they're trying to teach is that instinctively, you occasionally sign up for rigorous courses of study rather than enroll in easy classes. This might satisfy your need to master things that do not come naturally. So I thought that was funny because I'm like, that's pretty much what they're telling you shouldn't be doing.
Which is exactly what you said at the beginning of the blab. Yeah, interesting. So they're pretty spot on so far. I'm enthralled with it. I think, one of the questions I definitely saw in the chat was, I think Ty said she did it, but then basically the so what, like, what do I do with this? And that's what I'm looking forward to digging into more now that we've done this. But anyway, so my 4th was, and I love that you guys are sharing what yours were. So Ty was learner for number 3 as well. That's awesome. I don't know, Coach Jenny, if you remember yours, but I also love that Coach Jenny is summing up our results in the chat. Cool. We'll get into that. So my 4th one was intellection. So Ty mentioned that as her number 1. So this was spot on. Instinctively, you absorb the written word like a sponge sops up water. You revel in an opportunity to lose yourself in a book. Time seems to flow by when you are the grateful guest of an entertaining or informative author. Like, I'm in love with the way they even wrote that. It's just like, this is beautiful. Are you enthralled with it?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of my intellection was very much about that reading is the key that opens the door to a world of fresh ideas. Often you see a situation or problem from a different perspective because of something you discovered while surveying a book, article, letter, or internet site. Your goal is to comprehend everything you read. It makes no sense for you to rush through books. So I thought this was really interesting because I think it sums up a lot of how I consume content. It goes right back to a lot of what was said in Achiever. And I don't know, it speaks a lot to why when I think about being an introvert, these things kind of fed that, where I might not necessarily be an introvert, but these are kind of introverted aspects.
Yeah. So I'm curious. I know that we both haven't dug too far into, again, the application of it, but I feel like some of the strengths are just kind of affirming things we know. So when you read something like that, which is like, obviously, you love to read. It's not like you're like, oh, I should go read now. That's a great idea. But is just reading that description, do you get any insight about kind of specific actions that you can take? Or is it more like TBD?
Yeah, I think that, so right after it gives you your description, it gives you some questions to think about. And that's where I didn't really dig into it. But I think, like, specifically from this, what I would take from that immediately is that there's no sense in rushing through reading things, because I do try to do that. There's so much out there to consume. Like this particularly for me is just kind of, yes, it affirms what I think I knew, but it also is kind of telling me it's okay.
And that you can use it for strength.
Yeah. But I definitely want to hear what your answer to that question would be.
In general?
Yeah.
Let me ponder that. I'll get back to you.
All right. So your number 4 was actually learner. So what was your number 3?
So, number 3 was, some of these are like, again, significance. People who are especially talented in significance theme want to be very important in the eyes of others. They are independent and want to be recognized. Driven by your talents, you sometimes derive satisfaction from helping people recognize they have reached their desired goals, and you fortify others so they grow stronger. So the way I interpreted this is, because I need so much positive reinforcement, I therefore am good at giving it to others. That's how I read it. And again, I was laughing at this because my roommate, every time I cook for her, I'm like, is it good? And she has to be like, it's so good. Yum. Thank you. Wow. And I'm like, no problem. But I mean, I even do it with you sometimes where I'm like, I need some positive reinforcement, Sarah. I did something good. Can you pat me on the head now? And so honestly, I kind of read that as it could be a kind of negative thing, but then I liked that they turn it around and say like that you help others recognize when they have reached their desired goal. So I was just thinking about coaching and the times where maybe a coaching client has come to us and been like, well, I haven't achieved anything. And I can look and be like, well, look at all you have done so far. So
yeah. Jenny's over there in the chat nerding out. We should really give her a seat after we're done sharing our last one. Learner combo makes you a major influencer and leader. And that's what I was going to say. I wasn't necessarily going to put that combination together like she did. But I was going to say, I think it describes a lot about why you started One Woman Shop. And being a leader and helping other people reach their goals. So I think it's not something to shy away from.
Okay, good. Was that positive reinforcement you were giving me? Because I need to be significant in the eyes of others.
You got it.
That's
so significant.
So significant. Okay.
So let's dive into our last one. Yes. This one I still really need to look into more because I'm still not 100% clear on what it means. But my fifth one was restorative. And what it's telling me is instinctively you may be a process thinker. Perhaps you search for the reasons something went wrong. Once in a while, you sort through facts, look for missing pieces, or study a sequence of steps. If you fall short of a goal, you might investigate until you know precisely what prevented you from being successful. Driven by your talents, you may be drawn to conferences, seminars, or classes. So I think this one, to me, goes very much with the intellection and the learner traits, and very much about, I forget which one was telling me that I kind of like to fix people and processes and things, but this kind of went exactly along the lines of that. So I think it fits, but I still want to dig into what it means by itself.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. Cool. Should I do my number 5?
Yeah.
Mine is input. So it says, people who are especially talented in the input theme have a craving to know more, so ties to learner. Often they like to collect and archive all kinds of information. And so they actually talk about basically collecting things and collecting knowledge. And I definitely don't collect things, but knowledge, I feel like that relates. It says, because of your strengths, you occasionally wade into the middle of certain thought-provoking conversations. And this might explain why you consider at length specific insights, concepts, or philosophies. Maybe you prefer talking with individuals who instantly grasp the meaning of your sophisticated words. Super sophisticated. I have the best words. You said it first. No, but I mean, I think about that when I blog sometimes, that I just like want to talk to people, and sometimes I'll go and have a conversation with someone, and I'm like, I just want you to understand like the random thoughts that I'm having in my head, and sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. And then again, it says you probably pay attention to what certain people think of you, and you use like complicated words or specialized terminology to position yourself as an expert. And perhaps you are restless to advance.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
No, I think it's to me, that one's like restorative, where it's like you got to kind of dig into it a little further.
Yeah.
But a lot of what you just said, I think, is pretty accurate. I'm interested what makes Coach Jenny say that's a great compliment to each other's strengths. Shall we open up a seat?
Yeah, let's go for it. Oh, I'm going to do that. The seat is open. Oh, no, I did that. Yeah, no, I think this is very I don't know. It was very insightful, and I liked, again, reading those personalized descriptions. And definitely the next step is the implementation. So maybe we'll even have to do another blab about how we've implemented our strengths.
Yeah.
But I would say, just looking at it right now, I would say not 100%, but for the most part, our roles within One Woman Shop pretty well capture our strengths. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Yeah. So for those that don't know, we do a lot of stuff as a team, but then we do certain things kind of solo, even though everything is a collaboration. The biggest thing that stands out for me in terms of you is that we both are coaching our clients, but I think that in a lot of ways you lead the coaching aspects of things.
And you lead processes.
Sure.
Hey, ladies.
Good
Hey,
morning.
nerd.
I'm hiding behind a sticky note because I'm under the weather. I hope that's okay.
Oh, I forgot you had a cold, Jenny. I'm sorry.
Totally okay. Thank you for letting me nerd out. This is one of the things I'm fascinated by. So what I was saying about the very last point, if you kind of look at the restorative input connection between the two of you, and look at the way that you guys are both big fans of essentialism, it's pretty spot on, right? You've got Cristina looking at every possible option so that she knows, and you can both be very discerning about that. And you've got Sara with the restorative thinking very strategically about the process. You look at the combination of everything you've got going there. It's a really good fit. So I just like how those connect.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Getting a bad echo. Sorry if you are too. But Jenny, I noticed you shared yours in the chat. I'm trying to scroll up and find them. But I didn't see a lot of overlap between ours. So I'm interested if you want to kind of share what yours are and talk about those a little bit.
Sure. So
sorry, you sound like you're crying too. I'm sorry.
I'm totally fine. I've got my Deborah Winger voice going. So mine are futuristic, strategic, maximizer, focus, and individualization. And so Sarah's familiar with my process for coaching, like my process for everything, which is called the PACT. And the PACT stands for possibility, ambition, confidence, and tenacity. It maps perfectly, right? So futuristic, what is the possibility? What could be, looking forward, right? Strategic, what do I want? Ambition, right? It's all about being very focused on what I want and being thoughtful about making it happen. Maximizer, which is maps to confidence in my mind. It's a little bit of a stretch, but I take it. Maximizer is somebody who really helps other people maximize their talents. I think this is a really, when I took this test the first time, that was number 1. Now that it's slipped to number 3, I'm okay with that, but I'm a little sad because I value that in myself the most. Focus, of course, maps to tenacity, follow through, right? Making sure it happens. And then individualization is all about how I'm really good at customizing everything for somebody else. I look at every person as an individual, which is why, as much as I have this PAC program, I kind of suck at using any kind of cookie cutter methodology, and I'm turned off by cookie cutter methodologies. So yeah, I mean, that's a really quick rundown, but it absolutely fits me. I'm very aware that it doesn't look like I'm very studious because I don't learn. I don't, I don't look for input. It's all me. So there's a little sense of arrogance in my strengths, but I'm okay with that.
Well, I think that it would be interesting if it took all 34 traits and rated them from 1 to 34 based on your answers so that you could see like, well, what was number 6 for me, Your top 5, Jenny, might be these ones because you're a coach and you're a damn good coach. And these are very characteristic of somebody that might coach. So it would be interesting to see where other traits lie in the spectrum for people. But I think, do you see, obviously this maps really well to your coaching practice. Do you see these things, how they apply to your personal life as well? Or do you see this assessment very much as a professional assessment?
It's a really important question because I think there's so many registers of how we show up in our different life compartments. And the StrengthsFinder, the way that Gallup built it, really was decidedly focused on career and vocation. And so it's actually structured that way. And I think that's one of the biggest weaknesses and critiques of it when it first came out. This 2.0 is better. But their language got a little softer because they were trying to make it fit more life compartments. I am not as strategic in, I don't know, my health and fitness as I am in my business, you know, and other people are more strategic in their health and fitness than they are in their business. So I think that kind of varies by person. But for me, this very much maps professionally. And a couple of them sort of map personally. I think Maximizer is, again, I'm stuck on. It used to be my number one. I expected it to be my number one. I'm sure number 34 is Woo for me, which, by the way, this is where Woo Woo came from. Woo is one of the strengths in the StrengthsFinder.
I used to be Woo.
Yeah.
I'm not Woo anymore. I don't win people over.
Although they use it a little differently than Woo Woo. So, but still. But yeah, hope that answers that question.
Definitely. Yeah. I didn't know that this is where woo woo originated, so that's interesting.
Well, for me, you know, because I made up the phrase and then.
Yeah, because it technically stands for winning others over.
I have not heard that before.
Yeah. So apparently I used to be more charismatic, and now I'm not anymore. So, I mean, I just think it's really interesting because I mean, in all my interactions with you, Coach Jenny, I'm like, that makes complete sense. Like, what 5 amazing strengths that totally seem to fit your work. I would just be super curious to talk to someone who gets 5 strengths and they're like, no, I don't see myself in this at all. So maybe that doesn't happen.
I've met people who are really kind of insulted by their strengths. You know, when I said I nerd out about this, when I was in grad school, a woman who helped develop this was one of my professors who helped develop the StrengthsFinder, right? Like she was So she was one of my professors, so we did everything via strengths. And there was somebody in my class that was very much insulted by the fact that they were all very nerdy, right, in her perspective. And she thought she was more of a woman of the people and less focused on research and being nerdy. I can't remember what the combination was. Probably similar to some of the combinations Sara got, actually. Except I think she would have loved to have achiever at the top, right? It didn't have any achievement in it. And she's really upset by it. And it was a realization that she wasn't playing to her strengths, but she didn't really want to play to the strengths of being kind of a behind the scenes doing the research kind of girl. So kind of speaks to that Rudy thing. Like Rudy he probably would have been a great steel worker, but didn't want to be, right? He wanted to be a football player. So
what did this woman do? Do you know?
I don't remember that much detail. I'm old now, Cristina. I don't, but I remember her being insulted and fighting with the teacher and us all rolling our eyes.
I think that brings up a couple things. First, that you know, I don't think this is meant to have somebody that reads all 34 and I was like, well, why wasn't I woo? And I'm jealous of the people that are woo. So not meant to inspire the comparison trap. But that is why I think it'd be interesting to see how everything ranks 1 to 34. But the other thing I want to say is I don't think, and this is where I think it falls short, but maybe it's just in the way they wrote the introduction to it. I don't think it's meant for people to look at it and say, well, now I can't do X, Y, Z because these are my strengths.
That's correct. It's not meant for that at all. Right. That said, Gallup is a tough company. They use the StrengthsFinder to decide whether or not you get a phone interview with them. And full disclosure, I applied for a job and did not get it because guess what is missing from my top 5? Empathy. Yeah, which was a real slap in the face. I'm like, wait, I'm super empathic or empathetic. I'm both, you know, and I didn't get points for empathy. And that was one of the traits that they required for the role I was applying for to be in the top 5. Another one of the criticisms, if you over rely on something like this, it gets kind of ugly. And their loss, whatever.
Absolutely. Well, we wouldn't have you here, so
yeah.
Gallup.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Jenny. This is super. I love that you nerd out over this. I had no idea. So
yeah,
I'm sorry we had to pull you on when you're under the weather.
No problem. No problem. Thanks, guys.
That green screen's so beautiful, though.
I know. I hope you feel better.
Thanks for joining us. So actually, we didn't actually say this in the intro, and I wanted to make sure we did say it, that this came up. The reason we decided to do the StrengthsFinder is because of our conversation on outsourcing. So we're talking about outsourcing and basically working with people who have strengths that you do not have. So if I am not strategic, then I probably should work with someone who is strategic, maybe like a project manager who is really good with strategy. And so that's where this whole thing came from. So just a little more context there.
Yeah, no, I think that context is really important because a lot of what we were saying with our outsourcing conversation was that it's good to have people that have different strengths. We think we were talking much more tactically about that. Like, Christina's great at direct outreach, whereas I like to be behind the scenes working on the blog. But this brings that to a much higher level because it's talking about your innate strengths in your personality, which, like you said, can't necessarily be taught. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I think it's really interesting. Like Jenny said, it's not meant to be something where you live by this and make no exceptions. But it's a really good way to look at things from another perspective. And yeah, like Jenny said, a piece of awareness.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, going back to the idea, like if you're aware of yourself, then you can articulate that to other people. And so if I know my example, if I know I need positive reinforcement, I can articulate that to people.
Yes, set the expectations.
Yes. I know, I'm just like sitting here being like, all right, like I want to go learn more.
Yeah.
Get it? Do you get it? Because it's one of my strengths.
So many corny jokes that we can come out of this with. So I guess, what is next? I want to dig into mine a little bit more. I want to actually look at the questions they posed, but I think for me, it's keeping them in mind as we do different things in the future. Knowing that, say that again?
Sorry, and hire.
Yes, and bring other people into the mix, or even people that we're just collaborating with, not necessarily hiring. And just a complete side note, when you're taking the test, you do have to put in your occupation or maybe the industry you work in or maybe it's employment status. And self-employed was not an option, which I found was really interesting. Because yes, I am employed full-time, but I took that in their context to mean I'm employed by somebody else. And I was like, where is the self-employment option?
I totally thought that as well. Yeah. Like work full-time.
I think one woman shop would. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Awesome. Well, we will report back when we have figured out how to better implement our strengths.
Yeah, and thank you, Jenny, for jumping on. Ty, thanks for being super active in the comments. We should definitely continue this over in our Facebook group.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. All right, we will not be back next week. Important note. For the hot seat, we're taking a week off. Cristina will be in Italy. And we'll be back on whatever the Wednesday is after that. That's so bad. The 25th, I'm guessing.
Yeah. We'll see you guys then.
Bye. Bye.